Situational awareness is more than just paying attention. It's the ability to perceive your surroundings and anticipate what's coming and respond lawfully and effectively to avoid danger. For police officers, this skill is not optional. It's a matter of life and death for the officers and a lot of times innocent people as well. Today we're diving into why situational awareness is absolutely crucial and how it can prevent critical mistakes. Joining us is Drew Moldenhauer. He is a 17-year police veteran and co-author of the book, How Smart Police Officers Use Situational Awareness to Improve Safety. Drew's real-world stories and expert advice will show you just how powerful staying alert can be. Let's dive in.
Well, Drew, just give us a Cliff Notes version of your law enforcement career.
Name is Drew Moldenhauer. Been a police officer now, sworn police officer for 17 years, 12 years full-time with the city of Ramsey in Anoka County in Minnesota. During that time, I was an active shooter instructor, use of force instructor, field training officer, and then patrol officer, but also did some work as a community resource officer. So some stuff like Coffee with a Cop, storybook time for kids, which was a phenomenal position. Really, really liked that one, planning things for the city. And then my last 5 years, I've been in a part-time role with the city of Osseo Police Department in Osseo, Minnesota. And there I just work as a patrol officer, just in the part-time role.
Okay, so you've done a little bit in law enforcement.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'd say you've been pretty busy. So I can't remember exactly what page number, but I want to start with complacency because it's no secret about the phrase complacency kills. But one thing that a lot of cops, if they're not careful, can get complacent about is traffic stops. You dove into that in the book about an experience you had. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, and it's basically one of the barriers to situational awareness. Situational awareness, your ability to perceive and understand what's happening around you while being mindful of how time is passing, and then being able to accurately predict future events in time to avoid bad outcomes. That's the definition of situational awareness. It's a three-part series, so it's perception, understanding, and prediction. And one of the barriers to situational awareness is complacency. And complacency for me, and where I look at it, is it's where we let our guard down. And this can happen a lot in law enforcement. I'm sure it's happened to anyone that's been in the job for a while. And I tend to see the most times where we develop some complacency is usually in the kind of 8 to 12 year mark, where maybe we've gone a while without any big incident happening. How many alarms have you been to where it hasn't been the real deal? How many traffic stops have you done where nothing bad happens? So after you do about 100 of those, the 101 or 102 is one that something happens to you, and then that's when you get caught. And when you get caught and you're not prepared, that complacency kicks in. It's flawed situational awareness, and that's when you get, bad things can happen. So it's always best to stay on guard and remain vigilant. And what happened on that particular case is I went to go stop this car thinking nothing of it. And when I stopped the car, all of a sudden a guy got out and he said, just shoot me. And it was one of those things where he popped right out of the driver's seat. And I was like, holy cow. And it completely caught me off guard. I was standing in kind of, if you will, in some of the training, the kill zone of where the squads are positioned. I kind of froze for a second. I wasn't prepared for that situation because I was complacent. I just started walking up on it like it was any other kind of traffic stop. And that really kicked in my head about, all right, I got caught here. This is complacency. And if I can tell others about that, then I'm sharing the message that we have to remain vigilant, stay on guard in these situations, because we just never know when those situations can happen. Same thing with alarms as well. You're responding to it over and over and over. You get canceled, oh, it's the same thing until you pull up on that one and it's the real deal. That's when bad things can happen. And again, that's usually tends to be right in the middle of when your career is.
You got me thinking about a time when I was still relatively new to the job and I had switched from one agency to another, and I was with a training officer. And it was late at night, and we both noticed at an intersection there was a car waiting at the light. It didn't have a headlight working, and the training officer said, "What the heck? Let's stop it. We need to wake up." And I thought, wait a minute, we can't stop cars for the sake of waking up. That's a bad mentality to have. We need to stop them because of the infraction or the misdemeanor, and then not have the mentality of this is just going to be some routine traffic stop.
And then those are the ones that will get you. And I mean, it's One of my business partners and two of my really good friends that were involved in an officer-involved shooting, it came out as a suspicious vehicle. How many of those calls do you get? Suspicious vehicle in a parking lot, and turned out to be an officer-involved shooting from that. So even the way that calls are coded, sometimes we automatically just go to, oh, this is no big deal, and that's when we can get caught.
Absolutely. And like nobody's immune to that. Nobody purposely gets this way,
Yeah,
but it's too easy to become that way. So stay vigilant, please. But
exactly.
I did want to continue on and bringing up some things I read in the book. Chapter 3, I was reading more about how you brought up the point about officers trained to fail. Can you elaborate on that? Because that's pretty, I mean, that that's got people's eyes open like, wait, what do you mean?
Absolutely. So, a couple of ways in which, and when I present this, I presented this to, and it happens across all over the place, not just with police officers, but just to prove a point. Firefighters trained to fail, EMS trains to fail, police officers do. I have taught this to electrical linesmen. I've taught this to people in gas and oil, to dispatchers. We all have trained to fail somehow. And where that will really get exposed is during those high stress, high consequence, time compressed environments when you have to make big time decisions in those stress induced environments. And we will go right back to our training, almost like robotic action. When you watch an officer or something happen in a high stress situation, you'll watch them go right back to a robotic action where they're not even thinking, because the scripts of knowledge have been written in their brain already by repetitions in those training environments. So let me give you an example. When I was in the police academy, we were taught to, when we would do a felony stop, you would get out, you'd stand behind the car door, you'd have the people come back to you, you'd have your partner go up, arrest them, bring them back. Well, after reading a lot of studies about it, those doors don't stop bullets. So when the perpetrator would fire back at the cop every time would go and stand behind that door, which is not good cover. It was just concealment. So during these high stress, high consequence, time compressed environments where it was a pursuit or a felony stop, the cop had all those scripts of knowledge in their brain, doing it over and over and over again, that they go right back to standing behind that car door instead of canting their squad and going behind the engine block to stop the bullets. So it's a training failure, or we like to call it sometimes a training scar. But during a really high stress situation, they will go right back to that. And so we have to train better. We have to figure that out. Well, oftentimes look at a situation and be like, what were they doing or what were they thinking when they did that? Truth is, they weren't thinking. It was robotic action. They were going right back to the way they were trained. And when I talked about context dependent learning, this kind of comes right into this as well. As I know, as a police officer, I trained to throw stop sticks right in a very controlled environment in our PD garage. And it was like, all right, everyone just throw them. And I actually trained officers to do this when I was a young use of force instructor. Just throw it and then just kind of wheel it up here. Okay. Well, in context, is that really how it's going to be happen? Or are you going to be really stressed out? Where is your nearest cover? Where is, the highway at? How are you going to toss these things? Because in real time, that vehicle might be going, 100 miles an hour, whatever your policy is, 80 miles an hour. It might be coming at you. You might not have good cover. So you don't have those scripts and knowledge in your brain. Then under high stress, you might be even standing out in the middle of the road trying to throw these things and get hit. Stop sticks are one of the scariest things ever, where people can get killed so easy if you don't have the proper cover, if you don't know what you're doing. Now, all these things are going on in your brain and you haven't practiced for it. So other things, just like when you're with your partners and you're doing the drill where you disarm them and then you hand it right back to them, disarm them, hand it back to them. When you do that, that's another training to fail, because if the real deal happens, and I've heard this out of Denver, and I want to get this video clip somewhere, that someone actually disengaged, took a gun away from a perpetrator and handed it right back to them, realizing, oh my gosh, I did that, hit it again, and then took it back. But that was that training scar. That's that training to fail. And we see this from firefighters when they don't do a 360 size up on a building and they just rush in because all their training is, we're going to go in, we're going to go in, we're going to go in. Then when the real deal happens, they don't take a look around the whole building. They just run in and it collapses on them. So really important to take a look at your training in your departments and see, are we trained to fail? Where are we seeing some officers making some mistakes that it's this robotic action and it's going the negative way? And a lot of people want to be critical of those people, but it really comes down to the way that they were trained.
You brought up department training. I'm of the opinion, even though the department does its best, no officer should rely only on the department provided training. They have to invest their own time, a lot of cases investing their own money. I invested in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu for years in addition to Krav Maga training. What else do you recommend police officers do to get themselves trained up to avoid going into this robotic mode that doesn't bode well for them, particularly if it's techniques that are setting them up for failure?
I think one of the biggest things is having everyone analyze that and take a look at, are we setting this up right? Like a good example is we've came a long way and we've shifted from the old red man of having a red man come into the room. Let's take out our batons and just start smacking this red man. Is that really what happens out on the road? I don't remember ever using that, but yet we dialed that up and we would have that in training all the time. And is this really how it's really going to happen? I think that's the most important thing, is to look at and say, if this were to happen, how would we handle this? And let's take an accurate prediction into the future and say, how would we do this? And let's start working backwards from there. And how can we set up these trainings to make them more realistic and to do the right thing? So it's firearms training, those times that you're going to use high stress situations, pursuits, stop sticks, looking at your policies, looking at the way you're training. A lot of places will say, well, we don't have time to do this. Okay, so you don't have time to do it right. You just have time to do it quickly. Well, what do you think is going to happen to that officer now when they really go out in the road? They're not going to remember that because the scripts and knowledge were not in their brain. And when I keep saying scripts and knowledge, what I mean by that is a lot of times we like to call it muscle memory. Truly, scientifically, that's inaccurate because there is no neurons, which are memory storing, memory recalling cells in our muscles. They're found in our brain. So those scripts that are in our brain is what our brain will remember, that creates that robotic action. So we have to train the right way to develop those good scripts so that we do it. Standing on the line, just firing. Okay, 2 shots, center mass. Boom, 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 boom. I use this training video in the trainings when I train other police officers. Well, that same police officer gets in a pursuit, gets out, just says, get your hands up, fires 2 rounds right in the back of this guy on a motorcycle. Completely, the guy had no weapons, anything like that, but the scripts were in his brain of, when I get out, high stress situation, tactile stimulation, this hand hits this hand, boom, boom, he just fired and he didn't even realize he did it. And that's just a horrible training scar where if they maybe had the thing flip back and forth and say, hey, assess this threat. Is it lethal or not? Don't shoot, shoot. But he was just trained shoot, 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 shoot. And you do that over and over and over again. That's where that training to fail comes in.
I hate to hear that, but you also take into account of how tired police officers are, particularly ones at agencies where they are very short-staffed and they're overworked and they're doing that mandatory overtime thing. So how does fatigue affect an officer's ability when it comes to situational awareness?
Well, just like you said, I mean, being tired, and I can remember when I was a police officer working those shifts, you'd work 12-hour shifts, then you might have court in the morning, and then after that, you have to come in for mandatory overtime or you're held over. And when all that happens, yeah, you might be able to sneak in a couple hours of physical sleep, but truly, your mental rest has never had enough time to mentally rest. And there's so much activity that goes on in our brain when we sleep. And one of the metaphors I like to say about this, and I've read in a couple business books, is even the best lumberjacks in the entire world always have to stop to sharpen their saws. And that's kind of the way of saying we need to stop and take an actual mental break because of all the stuff that we deal as police officers. Stress, you're dealing with, crisis intervention techniques, you're going to domestic type calls, you're dealing with suicidal people. All that can have such an effect on you that you can fatigue you mentally. And when that happens, you're just slower reaction time. That they've done tests on people that they actually have worse reaction time when they are intoxicated than lack of sleep. And we have to make sure that we're getting a good amount of rest, but also checking out with our mental side of things and doing something outside of the job that frees our mind from that, because all that fatigue really erodes our situational awareness, where we might not have, like I talked about, that perception, understanding, and prediction, where it's going to erode that situation where we're not going to understand things as well. We're not going to be able to make those good predictions because we're on lack of sleep. And also our mental fatigue is really bad. The thing that always just irks me is Pilots and truck drivers are mandated that they have to have certain amount of hours of sleep in between when they drive around. But police officers, nurses, police officers carry a gun. They're justified to take people's lives. They're in high-speed pursuits. I mean, you talk about that, but there's no regulation that says they have to have X amount of hours of sleep before that. So one of those things is making sure that you are getting really good quality sleep, but also having a mental checkout with your brain, because having all that happen, you're not giving your brain enough time to rest, and it's under high stress all the time.
Glad you brought up the point about the pilots and the truck drivers. I mean, it's really something to think about. I think, in my opinion, it's like there's no excuse. There has to be a policy to have arrested officers rather than having a bunch of liabilities out there. When it comes to fatigue, not only can police officers go back to that robotic sense, I find that the more tired you are, the more negative emotions you can feel, but also express. So when it comes to situational awareness and de-escalating a situation, you pointed out in your book some phrases that you've made the mistake of using, into which I made the mistake of using them as well, particularly when I was frustrated or tired. Can you dive into some of those? Because we don't want to fuel a situation. We want to bring it down as many times as we can.
Yeah, and I talk about a chapter in my book, and it's called Breathe, and it's all about de-escalation. And I was at the academy, and again, this was 17 years ago. Things have changed dramatically since then, but it was more all about how we can control a situation, and it was more of this forceful kind of tactic, like yelling at people to calm down, like calm down. And 55% of communication is your nonverbals, 38% is your tone, 7% is the actual words. But truly, we escalate situations when we start using those attack words like calm down, like get over here. And we're saying that our whole tone and everything really escalates the situation. So, just some things that I developed over the time is we really got to know when we're going to de escalate a situation, we have to de escalate ourselves first. And when we get upset or stressed, and I always think about like when your sergeant sends you an email and you're like, all right, not today, Chuck, and you want to just write them back right there, right? We're responding from a fight response, which is highly emotional. That's our sympathetic nervous system kicking off. So we're not thinking logically. And on a lot of calls we go to, that's who we deal with right away, is they're not thinking logically, they're thinking irrationally. They just got in an argument with their significant other, they're a death scene, something, they're not thinking clearly. And on average, it takes people 20 to 60 minutes to engage their parasympathetic nervous system, which is more your relaxing side, to come down to the normal range of where you're at. So I developed a acronym in this book called Breathe, and that's literally the quickest way to start coming down from that sympathetic fight flight response is to take a breath. Another thing that can help is going for a walk or calling a loved one. And if you can do all three of them, that really helps with that. So I talk about it in the book, just breathe, as, actually taking a breath and knowing yourself that you need to take a breath. I've had people cut me off in traffic. I've had customer support with Verizon Wireless, and they've worked me up. So I know how that is. But truly, like, to calm ourselves down first, we got to breathe, go for a walk, talk to a loved one. Then the second part of that is recognize what's going on in this situation. So if you're de-escalating someone else, have you seen this situation before? Look at your environment. Is your red flag warning system going off? Recognize your environment, what's going on from there. Then evaluate the situation. You examine or evaluate, is this a logical situation that you have going on, or is this person truly highly emotional? And if it's a highly emotional situation, you know that you're just seeing that tip of the iceberg like I'm talking about. There's a lot underneath there. So don't take it personal. Just weather that storm of emotions that's coming at you, because if we start taking everything that people are saying to us in those emotions and we don't weather that storm, if we go run right into it, we're really going to have a bad situation. And that's when things escalate, because then everyone's very emotional and emotions start going, and that's when fights happen. And then from there, I just talk about that, like abstain, so abstain from moving in too quick, weather that storm, because a lot of us like to just, when people come at us, especially young cops, and when I was a young cop, I was the same way, like, no, I'm in charge. And truly, we don't know what these people have been through in that day. And we got to give them a chance to really get those emotions out. Think about how you want to handle it. And that's the T and H. So think and handle. and then handle it professionally like you should as a police officer. And then the last part I just talked about is examine and evaluate how it went. What could you do better? Share that almost like a near miss event at roll calls when you're talking with younger cops or other ones and just say, I really screwed up on this. I tried to gain rapport with this person, but I said the wrong thing. And don't be afraid to, humble yourself, because that's how we all learn and we all make mistakes in this job. But if you can tell someone, especially if you're a senior person, a seasoned vet, and you can say, I did this and I made a mistake, so don't do the same thing I did. Try this works better. Or pulling some of those younger cops aside and saying, hey, I noticed how you were talking to those people. You got to be, caring is cool. Show that you care about this person. You're going to get a lot more compliance out of that. So those are some of the things I talk about in that chapter. And that's just from years of being on the street.
Oh, that's a pretty good acronym. That's good and practical advice. So I appreciate that. I want to close out by going into the talking about the situation where every cop trains for, but no cop wants to have to implement that training, but they better be ready for it if they have to. That's all I'm going to say about that. They have to. No option. So what's your advice on responding to active shooters or active threats?
My biggest thing, especially for police officers, is some of the best training I've ever had in my entire life came from active shooter training. And I don't even know if the instructors knew it at the time, but they did a really good job. Is your subconscious mind can remember two things really well and pull it to your conscious memory. And one of those is emotional. Like right now, Scott, I could ask you, what were you doing on the morning of September 11th, 2001? And you could rattle it off to me like that, no problem. But if I were to say to you, what would you have for breakfast 6 days after that? You'd be like, I have no idea. Well, you can remember that emotional response. So with the active shooter, keep it emotional. If it's showing these videos that are pretty tough to watch, for police officers, that can be a good thing because it's an emotional response. You can remember emotions. And the other thing is you can remember repetitions. Like if I were to tell you right now, say your ABCs, A through Z, you can rattle off without even thinking about it. I can tell you like a scout is trustworthy, loyal, I can do all that, but I can't do it backwards because the scripts aren't there. So as you run these drills and you're going through your training, have the training be as realistic as possible. So it's stress-induced, context-dependent learning, as real as possible, because this will be the scariest call of your entire life. I haven't been on one, but just watching the videos from it, seeing what's going on, and even the training, it gets my heart rate through the roof. So train like that, keep it emotional, keep it repetitive with the right things that you have to do. And I think the biggest thing is having that context dependent learning where you're having some classroom, but you're also running through drills so that you're creating those good scripts in your brain of that, and that you're getting in there and getting after these people, because we just keep seeing more and more of these. And we have to get better and better about how we handle them, and things are always changing. Also collaborate with, fire, EMS, see how they can help, because when we have all of them coming to a scene, parking all over the place, it's good to know what everyone's role is when it comes to that.
100%. Drew, obviously, we could talk a lot longer about this, but you've provided a lot of good information. I encourage anyone who's been watching the video, well, watch it again, or they have the option of getting in touch with you and taking advantage of the training and insights you offer. So point people towards your training as well as the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So my company that I own, I'm wearing a shirt with it right now. It's called Blue Ethos Specialized Training, and we train all over the United States, active threat preparedness, situational awareness. We do de-escalation training as well. You can go onto my website, which is blue-ethos.com. My email is drew@blue, BLUE-ethos, ETHOS.com. Get a hold of me. If you go on our website and you're interested in the book, if you put in code BLUE38, you will get 10% off just for listening to this podcast, and we'll get that shipped out for you. If you want this kind of training at your police department, we do 2 hour, we do half day, we do full day. I have a story from the two guys that are involved in an officer involved shooting, and they talk about some of the things that I talk about and how that happened to them, that they went through the same exact situation, but different things happened to their brain, and they explain that whole deal and they do a debrief, and it's really good. So Scott, I can't appreciate you enough for having me out here. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, would love it.